The photograph changed every night. The 6 children were always in the same position, hands folded neatly in their laps, but their closed eyes would sometimes open just a crack, as if they were peeking at something moving in the room. You won't believe what happened next. Watch until the end. The orphanage sat at the edge of Salem, far enough from town that the screams wouldn't bother anyone, not that matron Eliza Blackwood allowed much screaming. The winter home for displaced children operated under strict discipline, and the 37 children who lived there in 1912 knew better than to make unnecessary noise. Thomas Reed was 10 years old when he first saw him. It was an unusually warm March evening, and Thomas had been sent to fetch more coal for the kitchen stove. The cellar steps creaked beneath his bare feet as he descended into the damp darkness, oil lamp casting long shadows across the stone walls. He heard it before he saw anything, a soft scratching sound, like fingernails against wood. Thomas froze on the third-to-last step, lamp held high. "Hello," he called, his voice barely a whisper. The coal bin was in the far corner, a massive wooden container that always seemed to hold less coal than it should. As Thomas approached, the scratching stopped. He placed his lamp on a nearby shelf and reached for the rusty scoop. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up. Someone was watching him. He could feel it, the pressure of eyes boring into his back. Slowly, Thomas turned around. In the corner opposite the stairs, half hidden by shadows, stood a figure. It was tall and thin, impossibly thin, with limbs that seemed too long for its body. Thomas couldn't make out a face, just a dark smudge where features should be, but he knew it was looking at him. "Who's there?" Thomas demanded, trying to sound braver than he felt. The figure didn't move, it didn't speak, it just watched. Thomas abandoned the coal scoop and backed toward the stairs, never taking his eyes off the corner. When his foot found the bottom step, he turned and ran, forgetting the lamp in his haste. Matron Blackwood was not pleased. "A coal and a lamp, Thomas," she said, her thin lips pressed into a bloodless line. "That's 6pence you've cost us. No supper for you tonight." "But there was someone in the cellar," Thomas protested. The matron's hand shot out, gripping his ear with painful precision. "Lies will cost you tomorrow's breakfast as well," she hissed. "Now go to your dormitory and think about your sins." The boys' dormitory housed 12 children between the ages of 7 and 11. 6 iron beds lined each wall, with barely enough space between them to walk. Thomas's bed was third from the door on the left side, across from Benjamin Harker, who had arrived at Winter Home just 2 months earlier. "What happened?" Benjamin whispered, as Thomas slipped under his thin blanket. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Thomas glanced toward the door to make sure no monitors were listening. "There's something in the cellar," he whispered back. "Something not right." Benjamin's eyes widened. "What do you mean?" "It was watching me, just standing there, watching. I couldn't see its face." From 2 beds down, Alice Harper sat up. Girls weren't supposed to be in the boys' dormitory, but Alice had a talent for moving around the orphanage unseen. "Did it have long arms?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "Like they reached past its knees." Thomas felt a chill run down his spine. "You've seen it too." Alice nodded, twisting the end of her braid nervously. "In the attic 3 days ago. I was hiding from Matron, and it was just there, standing by the window." "What is it?" Benjamin asked. "I don't know," Alice admitted. "But it follows me now. I see it everywhere, out of the corner of my eye. When I turn to look, it's gone, but I know it's still watching." Did it do anything to you?" Thomas asked. Alice shook her head. "No, but every time I see it, it's closer." A floorboard creaked in the hallway, and Alice quickly ducked down beside Thomas's bed. The door opened, and Monitor Jenkins peered in, his round face impassive as he scanned the room. "Lights out was 10 minutes ago," he announced. "Anyone caught talking loses breakfast privileges." The door closed. Nobody moved until Jenkins's footsteps faded away. Alice crept out from her hiding place and whispered, "Meet me in the laundry room tomorrow during chores. Sarah and William have seen it too." For the rest of the night, Thomas lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Every shadow seemed to stretch and move. Every creak of the old building sounded like footsteps. And all the while, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was standing just outside his field of vision, watching, waiting for him to close his eyes. When morning finally came, Thomas had dark circles under his eyes and a hollow feeling in his stomach that had nothing to do with his missed meals. Have you ever experienced something similar? Leave a comment. The laundry room was hot and damp, filled with billowing clouds of steam that made it difficult to see more than a few feet ahead. Perfect for secret meetings. Thomas found the others huddled between two massive copper tubs, their faces pale and drawn. Besides Alice, there was Sarah Collins, a small 7-year-old with perpetually tangled hair, William Peters, whose spectacles were held together with string, and the twins, Elijah and Elizabeth Taylor. 6 children, all with the same haunted look in their eyes. "You've seen it too, then?" William asked Thomas, pushing his glasses up his nose. Thomas nodded. "In the cellar, it was just watching me. It watches all of us now," Elizabeth whispered. Her brother nodded in silent agreement. Sarah was twisting her apron between her fingers, leaving damp wrinkles in the fabric. "It comes at night, mostly," she said. "I wake up and it's standing at the foot of my bed. I pretend to be asleep, but I can feel it leaning closer. It smells like wet earth and something rotting." "What does it want?" Benjamin asked, looking from face to face. "I think it feeds on fear," William said, his voice taking on the authoritative tone he used when sharing knowledge from the books he smuggled from Matron's office. "The more afraid we are, the stronger it gets. And the stronger it gets, the closer it can get to us." "How do you know that?" Thomas demanded. William pushed his glasses up again, a nervous habit. "I've been keeping track. First, we just glimpsed it from far away. Now it's coming right up to us. And the more we see it, the more we fear it. And the more we fear it. The closer it gets," Alice finished for him. The 6 children fell silent, the only sound the rhythmic sloshing of laundry being agitated in the tubs around them. "We need to tell an adult," Thomas said finally. The others exchanged looks. "I told Miss Henrietta," Sarah said, her voice small. "She said I was having nightmares from reading too many penny dreadfuls and made me scrub the entrance hall with a toothbrush. I told Monitor Jenkins," William added. "He reported me to Matron for disruption. I got the cane." Thomas felt a sinking feeling in his stomach. "So we're on our own." Elizabeth suddenly clutched her brother's arm, her fingernails digging into his skin. "It's here," she whispered. The steam in the laundry room seemed to thicken, coalescing in one corner into a darker mass. Thomas couldn't make out a distinct shape, but he felt it, the familiar weight of unseen eyes. "Don't look at it," William hissed. "Looking makes it stronger." The 6 children huddled closer together, eyes fixed on the floor. Thomas could hear Sarah's rapid breathing, feel Benjamin trembling beside him. The air grew colder despite the steam, and the hair on Thomas's arms stood on end. Something moved in the corner of his vision, a too long limb extending from the mass of steam. Thomas squeezed his eyes shut, heart hammering in his chest. "What do we do?" Alice whispered, her voice barely audible over the pounding in Thomas's ears. "We need to find a way to stop it," William replied. "There must be something in the library, some book that can help us." The presence lingered for another moment, the air heavy with malevolence, before the laundry room door banged open and Monitor Jenkins's voice cut through the steam. "What's going on in here? This isn't social hour." The sense of the presence vanished, leaving behind only the ordinary humid air of the laundry room. The children quickly dispersed to their assigned tasks, but not before William whispered, "Library, after dinner." The Winter Home's library was hardly deserving of the name, a small room with 3 bookshelves containing mostly religious texts, educational primers, and a few approved novels for the older children. But behind a loose panel in the wainscoting, successive generations of orphans had created a hidden collection of forbidden books, ghost stories, scientific texts, newspapers, and a few volumes of dubious origin that had been smuggled in over the years. It was to this secret library that the 6 children crept after dinner, using the well-established system of signals and diversions that the orphans had developed to evade the monitors. William went straight to a small, leather-bound book with no title on its spine. The pages were yellow with age, the text handwritten in faded ink. "I found this last week," he explained, carefully turning the brittle pages. "It's a journal from 1872, written by a man who worked as a doctor here when this was still a hospital. Listen to this. April 17th. The patient in room 7 continues to deteriorate. He reports seeing a figure that stands in the shadows and watches him. The description is always the same, unnaturally tall and thin, with limbs that seem too long for its body. The patient insists it draws closer each night. Other patients have begun reporting similar sightings." Thomas felt a chill run down his spine. "That's exactly what we're seeing," he whispered. William continued reading. April 23rd. 3 more patients now claim to see the figure. Strangely, all were housed in room 7 at some point. Is there a contagious delusion spreading among them? Or is there something more sinister at work? William flipped through several more pages, scanning quickly. May 9th. God help me, I saw it tonight, standing in the corner of room 7, just as they described. When I approached, it vanished, but I felt it watching me from somewhere I couldn't see. I fear for my sanity." The last entry was written in a shaky hand that sprawled across the page. May 15th. It follows those who see it. It feeds on their fear. The only defense is to deny it access. What cannot be seen cannot follow. The eyes are the gateway. Only those who close the gateway can be safe. The 6 children looked at each other in the dim light. "What does that mean?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. William's face was grim behind his spectacles. "I think it means we have to stop looking at it completely." "Ibu, how can we stop looking at it completely?" Thomas asked, his voice hushed. "We have to open our eyes sometime." Elizabeth clutched her brother's hand, knuckles white. "Unless we don't," she whispered. The room fell silent as the implication of her words sank in. Sarah began to cry quietly, tears tracking down her dirty cheeks. "There has to be another way," Alice said firmly. "Maybe we could leave Winter Home, run away." William shook his head. "It would follow us. It's attached to us now, not to this place. The doctor's journal said it followed patients even after they were moved to different rooms." Benjamin, who had been quiet until now, suddenly spoke up. "My grandmother used to talk about creatures from the other side. She said they had rules they had to follow, like vampires can't enter unless invited, or how fairies can't touch iron." "This isn't a fairy tale," Thomas said, but without conviction. After all, what were they dealing with if not something from stories? "Maybe we could set a trap," Elijah suggested, speaking for the first time. "Lure it somewhere and lock it in." "How do you trap something that can disappear into shadows?" Alice asked. Outside, the dinner bell rang, signaling evening prayers. The children quickly returned the journal to its hiding place and filed out of the secret library, each lost in their own thoughts. That night, Thomas lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, fighting to keep his eyes open. Every time his eyelids drooped, he imagined the figure standing closer, watching, waiting. From across the narrow aisle between beds, he could see Benjamin was awake too, his eyes reflecting what little moonlight filtered through the grimy windows. "Can you see it?" Thomas whispered. Benjamin nodded almost imperceptibly. "By the door." Don't look directly at it. Thomas kept his gaze fixed on the ceiling but could sense the presence. The air felt thick, hard to breathe, and carried that distinctive smell Sarah had described, wet earth and decay. "It's coming closer," Benjamin breathed, barely audible. Thomas felt the mattress dip slightly, as if something was pressing against it. Cold air brushed his face, like someone exhaling inches from his skin. He wanted to scream, to run, but fear paralyzed him. Suddenly, the weight lifted. The cold retreated. Thomas risked a glance toward Benjamin's bed and saw his friend with his eyes squeezed tightly shut, hands clenched in prayer. After a moment, Thomas heard Benjamin's breathing slow, becoming deeper and more regular. The presence had moved on. Thomas closed his eyes too, forcing himself to slow his breathing, to pretend sleep. Eventually, exhaustion overtook him, and he drifted into uneasy dreams. The next morning, the 6 children met in the small herb garden behind the kitchen, ostensibly weeding but actually huddled together behind the tall rosemary bushes. "It was at my bed last night," Thomas told them, but when Benjamin closed his eyes and pretended to sleep, it left him alone. "The same happened to me," Alice said. "It stood over me for what felt like hours, but when I finally closed my eyes and kept them closed, it went away." "But we can't just keep our eyes closed all the time," Sarah pointed out. Practical, despite her fear. Matron would notice. We'd get in trouble. William had been unusually quiet, his face paler than usual. "It touched me last night," he finally said, his voice hollow. "I felt its hand on my face, like ice, but sticky somehow. When I opened my eyes, it was leaning over me. I could see where its eyes should be, just dark, empty sockets." The others stared at him in horror. "What did you do?" Elizabeth whispered. "I closed my eyes again and started reciting multiplication tables in my head, anything to pretend I wasn't afraid. Eventually, it left. But I could feel it watching me all night, waiting for me to look again." "It's getting bolder," Benjamin said. "And closer. What happens when closing our eyes isn't enough anymore?" The question hung in the air, unanswered. That afternoon, during the hour of silent reading, Alice managed to slip a note to Thomas. "Found something in Matron's room. Meet at the old well after chores. Important." The old well was at the furthest corner of Winterholme's property, covered over with heavy boards years ago, but still used as a landmark by the children. It was well out of sight of the main building, screened by a stand of ancient oak trees. Thomas arrived to find the others already waiting, huddled against the spring chill. Alice was holding something wrapped in a handkerchief. "What is it?" Thomas asked. Alice carefully unwrapped the handkerchief to reveal a small silver needle and a spool of black thread. "I found these in Matron's sewing box," she explained, "and I found this in her desk drawer." She pulled a folded piece of paper from her pocket and smoothed it out. It was a newspaper clipping, yellowed with age. The headline read, "Tragedy at Salem Hospital. 5 patients blind themselves in night of terror." The article was dated June 1872, just weeks after the final entry in the doctor's journal. Thomas read aloud. "In a disturbing incident at Salem Hospital, 5 patients were discovered yesterday morning to have deliberately sewn their eyelids closed during the night. Doctors are at a loss to explain the collective madness that led to such self-mutilation. The patients, all of whom had previously been housed in the notorious Room 7, refused to speak about their actions except to say they are now safe from its gaze. Hospital Administrator Dr. James Harrington has ordered Room 7 sealed and has resigned his position, citing ill health." The children stood in silence, the implications of the article sinking in. "The hospital," Sarah said slowly. "It was here, wasn't it? Before Winterholme?" William nodded. The East Wing was the original building. They expanded, when it became an orphanage in 1890. And our dormitory, Thomas began, is where room 7 would have been, William finished. They all looked at the needle and thread resting innocently on Alice's handkerchief. "We can't," Thomas said, but his voice lacked conviction. "It's getting closer every night," Elizabeth whispered. "Last night, I felt its breath on my face. It smelled like the grave." "What happens when it gets tired of just watching?" Elijah added. Benjamin picked up the needle, turning it over in his fingers. "The journal said, 'What cannot be seen cannot follow. The eyes are the gateway.' What if this is the only way?" "We'd be blind," Thomas protested. "Forever. But we'd be safe," Alice said quietly. "And together, we could help each other." Sarah began to cry again, silent tears streaming down her face. "I'm so scared," she whispered. "Every night, it gets closer. I don't want to see it anymore." The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the overgrown garden. Soon, the dinner bell would ring, calling them back to the orphanage, back to another night of terror. "We need to decide," William said, his voice steady despite the fear evident in his eyes. "Tonight, it might do more than just watch." Thomas looked at each of their faces. Alice's determination, the twins' silent desperation, Sarah's tear-streaked cheeks, Benjamin's grim resolution, and William's calculating fear. He thought of the doctor's journal, of the newspaper article, of the presence that grew bolder each night. Have you ever experienced something similar? Leave a comment. That night, the 6 children gathered in the small storage closet adjacent to their dormitory. Alice had smuggled in a stub of candle, which cast wavering shadows on their solemn faces. Outside, rain lashed against the windows, and thunder rumbled in the distance. You won't believe what happened next. Watch until the end. Thomas placed the doctor's journal, which they had removed from its hiding place, in the center of their circle. Beside it lay Alice's handkerchief with the needle and thread. "Are we really going to do this?" Sarah asked, her voice barely a whisper. "We don't have to," Thomas said, looking at each of them in turn. "We could try to run away." "To where?" William countered. "We have no money, no family. The authorities would just bring us back, and then Matron would separate us." "And it would still find us," Alice added. "It's not going to stop." Benjamin reached for the journal, running his fingers over the faded leather cover. "The doctor wrote that they found safety," he said. "Those patients who closed the gateway, but they blinded themselves," Thomas argued, though with less conviction than before. The memory of the presence leaning over his bed, its cold breath on his face, was still too vivid. Elizabeth took her brother's hand, their fingers intertwining in a practiced gesture of mutual comfort. "I'd rather never see again than see it coming closer each night," she said softly. Elijah nodded in agreement, his face pale but determined. They fell silent, the only sound the faint hiss of the candle and the distant rumble of thunder. In that silence, Thomas became aware of something else, a subtle change in the air pressure, a coolness that hadn't been there a moment before. "It's here," William breathed, eyes darting to the shadows in the corner of the closet. Sarah whimpered, pressing herself against Alice, who put a protective arm around the younger girl. "Don't look at it," Benjamin warned. But Thomas could see the others struggling with the same instinct that clawed at him, the desperate need to locate the threat, to keep their eyes on the danger. The candle flame wavered, then steadied, casting longer shadows than should have been possible in the small space. Something moved in those shadows, a suggestion of elongated limbs and a too thin torso. "We need to decide now," Alice said urgently. "It's getting closer." Thomas felt it, the weight of its attention, focused and hungry. The air grew colder, and he could smell that distinctive odor of earth and decay. The presence was no longer content to merely watch from a distance. It was reaching for them. "I'll do it first," William said suddenly, his voice shaking but resolute. He reached for the needle and thread to show it works, to show we can be safe. "No," Thomas said, placing his hand over William's. "We do it together or not at all. That's the only way we'll have the courage." The shadow in the corner stretched, impossibly tall now, bending at an unnatural angle to fit beneath the low ceiling. Thomas felt something cold brush against his neck, like skeletal fingers tracing his skin. "Now," he said. "We do it now." With trembling hands, Alice threaded the needle, the black thread almost invisible in the dim light. She passed it to William, who held it up. "Remember what the journal said," he whispered. "What cannot be seen cannot follow. The eyes are the gateway. Only those who close the gateway can be safe. We'll help each other afterward," Alice promised, her voice steadier than it had been in days. "We'll learn to live without seeing." "Better than living in terror," Benjamin agreed. The shadow moved closer. Thomas could feel its presence directly behind him now, looming over his shoulder. He couldn't turn around. He wouldn't turn around. "Everyone take hands," he instructed. "We do this together." 6 pairs of hands linked, forming an unbroken circle. In the center lay the needle and thread, gleaming in the candlelight. "On the count of 3, William said. 1, Sarah began to cry silently, tears streaming down her face. 2, the presence pressed closer, its cold aura enveloping them. 3. What happened next would become the subject of whispers and rumors throughout Salem for decades to come. The night staff at Winterhome reported hearing a strange sound, not quite a scream, not quite a song, coming from the east wing. By the time Monitor Jenkins arrived with his lantern, the storage closet was empty, except for a burned-out candle stub and a few drops of blood on the floor. The 6 children were discovered the next morning in their beds, lying peaceful and still, hands folded on their chests. Their eyes were closed, the lids neatly sewn shut with small, precise stitches of black thread. No amount of questioning, threats, or promises could induce them to explain or express regret for what they had done. They refused to allow doctors to remove the stitches, fighting with such desperation that eventually the attempts were abandoned. More disturbing to the staff was the children's apparent lack of distress over their self-imposed blindness. They moved about with an assurance that seemed impossible, navigating the orphanage as if they could still see. They stayed close together, always within reach of one another, communicating in whispers and gentle touches. When asked why they had done such a terrible thing, they would only say, to be safe from his gaze. After 3 months of fruitless investigation, the case was officially closed. The 6 children were declared victims of a shared delusion, a tragic example of hysteria in institutionalized youth. They were separated and sent to different facilities specializing in disabled children. Yet somehow, they found their way back to each other. Reports emerged of blind children traveling alone on country roads, moving with uncanny purpose. Within a year, all 6 had vanished from their respective institutions, leaving no trace of where they had gone or how they had managed to escape. In 1923, a photographer documenting conditions in rural orphanages captured an image that caused a sensation in the paranormal circles of the time. 6 young adults, their eyes clearly sewn shut, sitting in a perfect row on a porch somewhere in western Massachusetts. Their hands were folded in their laps, their expressions serene. The photograph bore the simple caption, "The Seeing Blind." Most copies of the photograph were destroyed in a fire at the publisher's office later that year, but one survived in the personal collection of Dr. James Harrington, the former administrator of Salem Hospital. After his death, the photograph was found among his papers, along with a note written in a shaking hand. They were right to close their eyes. It still watches from the shadows, waiting for someone to see it, but they found the way to escape its gaze. What cannot be seen cannot follow. The story might have ended there, forgotten like so many other strange tales from that era. But in 1967, during renovations at the former site of Winter Home, by then converted into a private residence, workers discovered a small metal box sealed inside a wall cavity. Inside was a letter written in 6 different hands, dated November 1912. To whoever finds this, know that we are safe now. We see more clearly, without eyes. The world thinks us mad, but we know the truth. It exists in the spaces between what ordinary people perceive. It feeds on fear and grows stronger with each person who glimpses it. We closed our eyes forever, but we still see. We see the real world now. The one behind the veil. We write this as a warning. If you ever sense it watching you from the shadows, if you ever feel cold fingers reaching for you in the dark, if you ever smell wet earth and decay when no one else can, do not look for it. Close your eyes. Close them tight. What cannot be seen cannot follow. Accompanying the letter was a small tin containing a silver needle and a spool of black thread. The new owners of the house reported no unusual occurrences until they hung a painting in what had once been the East Wing dormitory. The painting depicted 6 children from the early 1900s, standing in a row, their eyes closed. Within weeks, the family's youngest daughter began to speak of a tall figure that watched her from the corners of her room. Shortly after they abandoned the house, leaving most of their possessions behind. The house remained empty for years, gathering dust and rumors in equal measure. Urban explorers who ventured inside often reported feeling watched, particularly in the East Wing. One group captured an audio recording of what they claimed was 6 children singing in perfect harmony, though no children were present. In 2015, a team of paranormal investigators spent a night in the abandoned house. Their equipment malfunctioned repeatedly, but one camera captured a single frame of footage showing a tall, thin shadow stretching across a wall. The proportions were impossible, the limbs too long, the torso too narrow. The team's audio recorder picked up a whisper, barely audible above the static. "Open your eyes and see us. Close your eyes and join us." The investigators never returned. One of them was later found wandering on a country road, repeating the same phrase over and over, "What cannot be seen cannot follow." His eyes were swollen shut, though doctors found no physical reason for his inability to open them. The photograph changed every night. The 6 children were always in the same position, hands folded neatly in their laps, but their closed eyes would sometimes open just a crack, as if they were peeking at something moving in the room. Have you ever experienced something similar? Let us know in the comments. If you want to hear more whispers from the darkness, follow this channel. The next story might be closer than you imagine.